Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today on the show, I have Eloi Guterres. Eloi has 20 years, or more than 20 years actually, of experience in technology, and all of those working passionately to help enterprises adopt digital, build their future, and gracefully embrace change. He's accepted adventures in countries like the US, England, Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Greece, and he's worked in investment banking, retail banking, insurance, IT consultancy, software development, and even oil and gas. He's on the mission to advise companies how to use technology and change the world. Wonderful. So, Eloi, thank you so much for being on, man.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, man.
So, I think that there is, and you brought it up as well, but I think that there might be confusion within companies on what digitization means, digitalization, and digital transformation. They all have the word digital in it, but can you help us kind of make this fog of ambiguity, just clear that up a little bit so that we can define our terms and then dive deeper into how to actually implement this?
Well, definitely. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Raul. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you guys, to you and your audience. It's a topic that is very close to my heart. I really love talking about digital transformation, innovation, corporate and entrepreneurship. And regarding that topic in specific, it's really funny. Well, actually, for companies, it's not that funny. Because I believe that even at the highest level, even at board level and top management, most companies don't realize the difference, don't understand the difference between those three things. You know, digitization is simply transforming analog into digital. Basically, it happened when we jumped from cassette tapes to CDs. It happened when we stopped using Post-its and stick it everywhere and started using mobile phone notifications. Although I do still use Post-its. I love them.
Yes.
You're
right here, my love.
Exactly. And one of the best examples for digitization inside a company is when they decide to go, let's imagine, zero paper. They decide to abandon paper everywhere and go digital. And that's an example of digitization. I believe it's the first level of evolution in a company. Then comes digitalization. Well, that's a bit different. That involves already changing old ways of doing things by new ones through digital. New communication channels came along, and the companies start using them. You increase your reach automatically, and sometimes you even increase your revenue. That's the main goal for most companies. And I'll give you an example of a digitalization: is opening an e-commerce store to sell something that you already sell physically. So you sell books, you have a bookstore, and you start selling them online. That's digitalization, using a digital channel to do the same thing you did before. And
we're kind of like, sorry to pause there, but and with the digitalization though, like that's some of the transformations that we've seen happen significantly in 2020, where business owners had to figure out, how am I going to continue to transact into my physical business in an online environment? And for digital or mobile companies first, that was in the onset when you're doing your business model or your development, but also the companies that have been running 5, 10, 15, 20 years, being able to, we need to go digital over a weekend.
Precisely. And I believe most companies do exactly that. They think they're changing. They think they're changing their ways. Actually, they're just adjusting to the modern times. So they are doing the same things they did before, but they have to do it through different channels. Retail suffered a lot during this pandemic, and they had to readjust. And that's digitalization. Digital transformation is something quite different. It means changing the main mechanisms of your organization. Sometimes you even change how you relate to the market and your customers.
Interesting.
It means being agile, being customer-centric. Some of them were already customer-centric before, but that becomes crucial if you transform, and working hard on having seamless, pleasurable customer journeys. And it's sometimes it's designing your company from the outside in. Sometimes you even change your core. You've done your core for a while. It's served you well, but you need to change the way you approach the market, because maybe your core market is challenged by technology or challenged by newcomers, like Blockbuster was challenged by Netflix, and you need to find new ways of doing new things, and that means not only, for example, selling books offline in a bookstore and then selling them online is one thing. But then you think, maybe I have to go to like digital experiences with audio. That's digital transformation. That's doing a new thing. That's finding new business models. You need. I'll give you an example of digital transformation, for example, in a sector that I'm very familiar with, which is banking. Banking, for example, a bank relates to their customers the same way a traditional one, the same way since like almost 100 years. And they understand, and they understand they can't continue to do the same thing the same way, because new generations expect something different from a financial institution, from a bank. They expect them to be the treatment to be personalized. They expect other level of services. They don't want to go to a branch. So that must spawn the interest within the incumbent banks to be different, to find new ways of getting revenue from their customers, to serve them a different way. And one of the most important factors in digital transformation is the most forgotten one. It's funny. Employee engagement. You can't transform a company without having its human factor on board. They have to be there. They have to be committed. They have to understand what's happening. That's really important for that to be successful. So for you to have a perspective, Raul, McKinsey has a study that concludes that 70% of all digital transformations fail due to primarily lack of commitment. And it's top to bottom commitment. If your execution layer in your company doesn't understand what's happening, what's the strategy that your board or your strategy team is designing, or why these memos come to their emails about changes, we change the way we react to our customers, we change the way this process works. Now we have a new platform for customer engagement, for CRM. And if they don't have a perspective of why, and they don't understand the purpose, they will disconnect. It's funny. I'll give you an example. In a past professional experience, they did a survey on the company employees, and they asked them, so what do you, they gave an analogy to explain what was happening. But the question was simple. What do you understand is happening? And they read the responses. And when the company came to the board meeting and explained the results, they gave you an analogy, which is, imagine you have a boat, a rowing boat with all your company employees inside it on a line. And then they said, imagine you have 10% of your employees dramatically rowing fast and they moving forward. Then you have 40% of your employees, it's like slowly, steady, rowing forward. That's fine. Then you have 30% of your employees just like not moving, looking around. It's fine. It's moving forward. Yeah, okay. I'm fine like this. And then you have 20% of your employees rowing backwards. So you have twice as much people rowing backwards than those who are vigorously rowing forward. And that came as a shock to the company. They thought, "My God, it's why? I don't understand. We're doing this effort to go forward, to have a new plan, a new vision. Yeah, but you're communicating it poorly to the rest of your company. That makes all the difference, on success."
It's a huge overlapping theme as well, the leadership and how you're setting the environment for the team to understand what needs to happen, but why it needs to happen, and also having the transparency to ensure that the team collaborates to execute it. And I think that as teams or companies grow, that's one of the biggest bottlenecks, really, is just collaboration intra-team and across different platforms within the team. So I want to break this down real quick. So we talked about first digitization, which was analog to digital, paper to online, computer, laptop, tablet. The second one is digitalization?
Yep.
Digitalization, where that's where you're changing your physical transactions, your physical channels, but making them digital. For example, instead of selling on a storefront, you're selling on an online storefront. So it's the same action or transaction, but a different medium to meet your customers where they're at. The third is a little bit more tricky. This is more like it's integrated for the actual company core. You're kind of changing your DNA from the inside out, right? Because you're not only touching, the customer journey and finding ways to have delightful customer experiences. And that's something that when you mentioned a seamless, pleasurable customer journey, we're like, well, what does that even mean? Like, why do we have to make our customers feel like happy or pleasurable? Well, it's how do we delight them? How do we make sure that they have a good taste of the brand, your company brand, when you're working with them? So it's not only just your interactions, but also the business model, which that is like a huge overhaul. It's almost like, why would we need to start all over again? But I think it's adapting to where your customers are at. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because that's, the management piece is one piece of it as well, but also the planning and the strategy side behind that. I think it's once you plan properly and you do it properly, then the execution obviously is the heavy lifting. But let's talk about the planning process. If I were to look at our business model today, or just it can't be a cookie cutter solution, I know, but if we're looking at our current business model, especially for our audiences right now, where are some of the areas what you would look at first to identify where we can have a good digital transformation, or even like a qualification? Are we doing these things to meet our customers where they're at?
It's a good question, Raul. Well, I would say one of the first mistakes that the most companies do is thinking it's all about technology. And I'm an IT guy. Don't get me wrong. It's not all about technology. For me, technology, it's an enabler for the business change. You need to focus first on your customer. And the key word here is listen. Listen really. Listen well and deeply, and question them and ask them how is that, what do they expect, and it's not open questions, it's like, well, actually it is open questions. It's not driving them where you want them to go. It's asking them, what do you expect? What would you like from us? You like our product, that's fine, awesome. We like you like how we serve you, but would you expect more? What can we do? And that's key. And that brings us to the topic of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship. And companies must give proper space to that. Some companies think that innovation is a part-time job. That's a big mistake. They tell someone that they respect, let's imagine a head of the development department, and they tell him, we're looking at this innovation thing, and we think you should be 10% innovative. So do your day job, and then at the end of the day, save 1 hour and be innovative. It's like, that doesn't work like that. You need to protect these people. There are key factors that you need to give to these people so that proper innovation can be born inside a company. They need to have proper sponsorship. So top-level management must protect them, give them space and time. They must be allocated full-time to that. They must have proper resources, a budget to experiment and to move forward, and their KPIs, evolution KPIs, evaluation KPIs must be quite different from the ones of the company. So
you said something huge. So, but I want to again pause you, and I apologize for pausing so much. But
no worries.
Feedback loops in identifying where in the customer journey you can have them. And you just mentioned something that I think I want to make sure that everyone understands. You have a different KPI within that feedback loop than the actual company is tracking for other success metrics.
Exactly.
That is key. How do you develop those KPIs for that specific feedback loop?
It depends strongly on what you're trying to achieve, but they should be tied to the progress of this unit, because they should fail a lot, but fail fast, because failing fast is failing cheap, and having an iterative mindset, an MVP orientation to try it out. If it fails, pivot, move forward, find something else to do, move forward. And their KPIs should be attached to that progress, not to results, not to revenue, because you need to fail 6 times to be successful 1 or 2. And this mindset must propagate from the board level to the execution of these units.
Yeah.
And there's a big disconnect actually in that world. They're actually in the market between those people who spread the word about innovation and are the evangelists, and those who believe that's all talk, but no walk, and that they think those people haven't suffered the pain of execution, and there's a considerable gap between strategy and execution, and that's the sweet spot that few companies or individuals address. There are a few advisory companies, of some, I'm sure of it. I'm not going to name any of them, obviously, but they design your strategy, but they don't touch your execution. And then there are a bunch of consultancy companies, much more than strategy firms, that will read your strategy and try to implement it. And it's in that step that's the key one. You need to have very strong people from your side, the business side, that understands what you want, where you're going, to lead
having
that execution,
to implement
to be involved. On those iterations, because a friend of mine, actually an American friend of mine, launched a question on LinkedIn about, so let's imagine your innovation team and your development team are not together. Most companies are like this. What would you do? And that's the thing. That's a problem. If the thinkers and the doers are not connected, misinterpretations happen, disalignment. So you need to have someone, at least on those environments where that is a reality, you need to have someone from the innovation team, be a product owner or defender inside the development team, to make sure that the path is being followed, that the vision is being pursued. And
it's like a puzzle. It's like a puzzle piece. Like one piece is missing, the other piece fills it in. And that's how I imagine it right here. And then going back to what you said earlier as well, is that obviously when it comes to the measurables or the KPIs, and I want to give some tangible, practical, like real view examples for our audience, just to kind of solidify this, and why would we track different KPIs that aren't affected to the bottom line. I think we can add more to this, but again, a simple, plain, basic example would be, let's say for your company KPIs, I call them OKPIs, operating KPIs, from front end to back, and that includes your leads, sales, revenue, customer lifetime value, churn, et cetera, all those things, right? But when you're looking at your customers, you also want to look at, well, am I doing, usage rate on the application? If it's an application, am I doing engagement rate with our team or our service provider if it's a service? And being able to track, are they utilizing all the assets or all the tools that we're giving them? What's their average time of use? Are they requesting new features? And like those KPIs are not so far out ahead of the bottom line baseline OKPIs, the company KPIs, because they do affect, for example, customer lifetime value. But you're not measuring it in the same way because you're looking at it from the customer's perspective in this particular example, and looking at different feedback loops in every area of your company, like the area of your company being the front end for your sales and marketing, or even just like in your brand plays and what you're doing, and even from the back end for your product management, product fulfillment, service fulfillment, client fulfillment, customer success. It's looking at those things and being able to engage customers that way. And then the second point, just to make it clear that what you're referring to is like, it's kind of the gap between, I want to say wisdom, but I want to say it's the gap of knowledge and experience. Like, here's what you should do, go and do it, versus here's what you should do, here's how it's done, because we've done it before. And that gap, I think, exists all over the place, right? And being able to bridge that between teams and making sure that both teams have synergies to make that happen.
Completely. And you're completely right. The feedback loop must exist. And for that, maybe you should pursue an innovation platform to register that communication, those lessons learned and those steps that need to be taken. Something to drive innovation from that innovation team that sometimes it's closed somewhere in a room thinking, and the development team that is implementing or bringing it to market. And that team, innovation team, must have KPIs like amount of ideas conceived, number of prototypes that were tested, and number of prototypes that were passed to production environment. Those are innovation metrics.
Those are tangibles, right?
Plenty others, but nothing tied to revenue. A lot tied to the mental process of coming up with new ideas and testing them out and having results. Because you do need results. It's not just you have to dream big. It's one of my favorite sentences. Let's dream big because it costs exactly the same as dreaming small.
Yeah.
But let's have a notion of reality and the challenges of execution. And I'm talking more on a technology platform perspective than on a product development one. Product-wise, you have to dig deep on what your customers have to say and be bold, be brave, and fail fast, fail cheap. Once again, try it out. If it doesn't work, move on. You have to find that product market fit, or else you should just quit and move away from it. And it's also jumps into another thing. I don't know if you agree with me. If it's many companies, and it's a factor that it's less evident in the US, is some people are afraid to fail. Some companies are afraid their employees to fail. They see failure.
Yeah.
What do you agree that exists?
It exists because failure is conceived as moving backwards, or it's conceived as a loss, especially if we're working to only achieve gains. One of the best mindsets that I've read or seen within companies as well as with leaders and entrepreneurs is I'm either winning or I'm learning. And they don't see failure as a failure. I think personally, failure is just not trying. Yeah. Because you will learn something. You might hit a wall, like you mentioned, taking the notion of reality of hey, execution, I'm not there yet. This is not the right team. And we'll talk about those things in a second. But when it comes to failure in itself, I truly see failure as just giving up and no longer trying. Not trying because the market told us we should stop. That's a learning experience. Me actually physically, mentally, or the team saying, we're not even going to try. That is failure.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's the right mindset, and I see most companies, I see that clear divide. Older companies, older mindset companies, they do see failure as a bad thing, and they penalize their employees if they fail. And newer generation companies don't do that. The unicorns of today and most startups, any startup knows that failure is a learning opportunity. And they move on. They iterate and they move on. And I know of very advanced e-commerce infrastructures, digital infrastructures for big companies in Europe, automakers, and they have such advanced platforms that they do A/B testing in real time. They don't know. Let's simplify this: a button. They want to change the color of a button that usually in their page is black, and what they do is they do A/B testing. So they chose a group or a country even, or a group of people. They target that group of people and they say, let's test a blue button with these persons. And let's test a red button with a different subset of those persons.
Yeah.
And they compare the results. And this is fast, because their platform is ready for performing these tests fast, understanding the results quickly, and then taking a decision even quicker. Because the cost of no decision is way larger than a wrong one.
Any improvement in convert, and this is more of a conversion rate optimization test to see which converts better to increase conversion pay, and any percentage is going to, depending on the volume and the price point, et cetera, is going to dramatically affect the bottom of the funnel as the top of the funnel. And I want to talk about what you mentioned earlier as well and dive deeper in the two areas, like the tools to allow teams to actually test and fail. Like, how do we empower our team members or innovators within the companies, or people who are, ready to really try something new, but at the same time, from a management perspective, to make sure that we have the right management soft skills, as well as we kind of put the chips in our table, right? We're not going to risk everything on a test and the company tanks because we didn't learn something, right? So I want to take risk as a factor here, but also as leaders, how do we empower the team and make strategic risk decisions in order to, fail fast, to learn, to integrate, to change, and to increase our value to our customers?
Well, good question, and it's indeed a very important factor, and it's a battle that it's currently being ongoing. Regarding the mindset and the character traits of a modern leader, it's changed a while, and you've seen that, for example, reflected on the role of the CTO of a large company. Usually a CTO of a large company in the past was just simply a guy that knew how to technically solve any issue. Nowadays, a CTO is a leader that needs a different skill set, a more human, empathic, purpose-driven mindset. It's a leader in technology that designs a path for success. It's no longer the geek that just controls the technical aspects of your company. And this is a reflection on the modern demands of a leader. And there's also a battle between the proper leadership models. And for example, some companies are trying out holacracy. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a non-hierarchical, shared accountability system based on roles. You have
what is it called again?
Holacracy.
Holacracy. Okay.
So, and basically here you have meetings just to align tactically, where you discuss KPIs and then the tension points. And then you have governance meetings at a more sparse frequency, where you discuss activities of each role, and the roles are ever changing. If they decide, no, this role makes no sense, or actually this activity makes sense to include in this role, and they all agree and they move on. And this separates people from functions, and it's really autonomous. But once again, it's a modern system. It's very disconnected from the current models of hierarchies. You go to most banks or insurance companies, and you have from top to bottom, you have 15 levels of hierarchy. And in Google you have 3, and the founders even wanted less, 3 or 4 levels. It's when you expand geographically, of course, you need different mechanisms, and remote is going to bring a new challenge, which is to maintain the team spirit in distributed teams. That's going to be a modern challenge nowadays. I don't believe in most scenarios in a fully remote experience. I believe that there must be some times in which you need to meet to bond, or else creating a team spirit will be quite challenging.
It's interesting that you made that an emphasis too, because I've spoken to other people and we talked about the importance of relationships and connections, but even in strategic mindsets and how you're executing different initiatives from the company. You're making this so important, and that's true. We can't just depend on pure remote to continue to drive, because the encompassing glue is the culture, right? The company spirit to move things forward.
Yeah, and it's what distinguishes you from the other company next door, to which your employee may go freely, because what's the difference? It will all come just to purpose and salary. And of course, the office will dramatically change. You won't see an office like you saw before. It's not a place where you have always the same desk, an assigned seat. You have your Post-its there because it's always your seat. You have that view. You have that plant. You have those Star Wars miniatures. Oh, no, that's just me. So it won't be like that anymore, but it will have to be a sharing space, a community space, where you go to bond, to share ideas, to network. And that will be the evolution. They won't need to be so big, because you will never have everyone again at the same time in the same spot every day. But they will need to change their purpose. You'll need more sharing areas, more corners of relaxation. You need individual workspaces, but more relaxed. So open space will never be the same again, and well, in a way, even before the pandemic, open space was a bit dying. You had zones. You could have zones in your office, but a full open space is quite noisy. And if you see a development company in an open space, all the developers have headphones. They phase out.
Yeah.
They're in their thing, they're listening to their music. The ambience noise is not pleasant. It's a lot of people. Sometimes someone comes next to their desk to talk to a colleague, and then they make noise and they laugh, and then you can't concentrate. So the full open space was already dying. So this is the final act. You need zones, and you need sharing, and you need a place where team spirit can be well grown. That's going to be interesting to see, Raul.
So those are some of the tools, and it's not more like a tool, here's like a tactical thing that I'm whipping out of my back pocket. It's more like, here's the environment that I'm setting for our team to collaborate with each other, to make sure that we have open communications across departments, to make sure that we all agree or and focus on, working through issues that we disagree on, but also physical as well as remote space, but also keeping the company culture alive. Even like if we can or cannot go into, space as the time this podcast is published, being able to manage and mitigate around that. So it's interesting to see that, like you mentioned, 70% of digital transformations fail due to lack of commitment from the top down. And that sounds more like a people problem, not like I don't have the right tools problem.
Exactly. And the communication becomes a challenge already naturally. And I've been in companies that have doubled in size and they were not unicorns yet. And suddenly people stopped knowing everyone by their names and they started saying, oh my God, I need to speak to someone in engineering. And they only have a reference there. So they must go there and ask who can help them. So it's not John in engineering, it's someone there in engineering that I need to talk to. And that is the first level of challenge, You don't know everyone. And then when you start having companies that are spread out throughout the world and in different time zones, that brings another level of challenges. Mm-hmm. And you need platforms. There you need technology to level the playing field. You need to have platforms for knowledge transfer. And especially on that different time zones. And you need different processes. I've also worked in companies that, for example, they were based in Portugal for their engineering team, but then delivery was done in Singapore. And the way you relate to someone that is in Singapore is not just, I'm not even talking just on the cultural level. It's a different reality, of course, in different parts of the globe, even just to manage the time zone difference, because they reach the end of their day. They send an email to the development team. The development team receives it in the next morning, and they say, "Okay, we'll respond later today." But then when they respond, it's 2 days forward.
So it's 2 days later. Yeah, it's always a thing when you're working across the world.
And that's not. You need some communication hygiene there, some processes to manage that. Companies must realize that, and definitely communication, if not personally, because you have a time zone difference. You need platforms for that. To manage projects, to manage teams, to share knowledge, platforms is the solution.
That's interesting, because that is still a tricky thing when we're working with development teams across the world. And right now, we're talking in 10 a.m. Pacific time, but that's way different from Portugal's time. It's probably late evening. And then in other parts of the world right now, it's like midnight, right?
Yeah, true. And that's going to be every day more and more. That will be a reality. It won't be a surprise. Companies will expect results independently of where the developing team is. And the person who is delivering those results must bear that in mind and take that into consideration when they design their processes and their mechanics. It's and they need to establish these. I describe them as like relationship communication hygiene. It's like, feel free to first of all acknowledge the contact of the person that contacted you, acknowledge immediately as you received it, even if it's at the odd time, and then give him an expectation of when he can expect at least a status point. You probably won't be able to respond to him with a full solution in an hour or two or something, but at least give him constant feedback. In 2 hours, I'll give you a status. And then 2 hours later, okay, we've advanced this amount. Let's talk again in 2 hours until you reach a solution and both parties are happy. That's a new reality of communication in with companies in different time zones, or with customers and suppliers in different time zones.
So, and not to oversimplify, but what we're seeing here when it comes to digital transformation, and again, depending on how you're delivering your products or services to your customers, when you're able to intake information, you got to look at the customer journey. from that customer journey, dissect or identify touch points like your customer feedback points that are important for you. Within each feedback point, make sure that you identify which KPIs that you want to measure for those specifically, like what are the KPIs that are important for these specific touch points, if it's, in the beginning of the customer lifetime journey or if it's in the back of the customer lifetime journey, depending on where they're at. And then from there, with that information, you can either before you can implement something, you got to design the environment, right? Design the environment for the team, either physically or remote, and how you're going to interact. Design what technologies are necessary for the team to collaborate and communicate. And also with communication, like I love the word, I'm going to use that word, communication hygiene, is making sure that, communication is clear, it's acknowledged, and then you have expectations of when you're going to receive status reports before you can ever even implement whatever you've learned. And then when you implement, then from there, you either follow Scrum or you follow, startup feedback loop to test, integrate, fail, test, integrate, fail, like all that cycle of testing, integrate it if it works, or fail and learn and start over again.
Exactly, and that's brilliantly put, very well summarized, and that will work in software development, that will work in e-commerce, and definitely that is working already in Industry 4.0. You see a new generation of industries, of factories, and Tesla is the best example, that they iterate quickly. If they fail, even SpaceX, if they fail, they learn their lesson and they come back stronger and very quickly. They are not on development cycles that last years for small things.
Have to move fast.
Yeah, they have to move fast. They made a mistake. Okay, it's not. Of course, you need to be aware that big mistakes can cost reputation, for sure. But small iterations can be taken to improve your product, and they don't need to wait a long time to come out to market. And it's that shift from the waterfall style of managing projects to the agile way is something that is really convenient for companies nowadays. But that mindset needs to reach board level. It's very hard to explain sometimes agility and sprints and quick feedback loops, as you've mentioned. It's very hard to explain them, and how you consume budgets, for example, for agile projects, like a bucket of money where you take money from, and you trust your team, you find the right velocity, and you try to deliver as fast as you can, but you can't commit to a result in an end date.
Because that's the whole point of being agile. It's not. Sure. It's the whole point. That's pretty interesting. So looking at it from the management perspective, how would you set budgets accordingly to test? How do you know exactly like how to do that?
Good point. Typically, most companies that are willing to embrace agility, they set goalposts. Like, let's imagine we have $1 million to spend. What are we going to do? We don't know if it's going to be enough. Okay, that's fine. Let's do it in agile, and let's have a sprint, a demo, a product increment delivery every month. Let's do monthly sprints. And every month you see how it's evolving, and you assess that progress according to the full goal that you have. And then let's imagine quarterly, you assess if the budget is being consumed at a good rate. And if it's not, if there's many deviations, you try to understand why and correct them. But you can't just stop the project and do it. Agility will allow you to do it in parallel, and then maybe on the next month, all those problems won't be solved. But then on the one next to that one, the forward one, you will solve them, and you will steer the project closer to what you want. Because the past way of doing things is that you committed to something back then, a year ago, that you don't know it's going to fit your purpose in a year from now. So you were committed and say, I'm going to spend $1 million for that. That's what I want. That's what I expect. And then you give no wiggle room for the development team, for the product team. And then you might end up at the end of that year, you've spent the money you wanted, you have that project you designed, but then it doesn't fit your purpose. Because you didn't allow it to be flexible, you didn't remove features, add features. Agility gives you that flexibility, but you have to trust. You have to have control mechanisms, not leashes for sure, but control mechanisms. You need to have feedback loops, like you've mentioned. You need communication from the bottom up, and you need to collect that info and steer and pivot and change and adapt. That's the beauty of it.
So obviously,
it works. Of course, it works better if you don't have. I'm sorry? Can you repeat that?
So like it makes sense to
Sorry,
get a
lost your.
baseline first. Get a baseline first before you actually, determine next steps or next budgets, because you need to know how the team works, what their velocity is, and the integration and feedback loops before you can determine and predict the next integration or the next test.
It's important to have a starting point, but the point here, the key thing here is, don't dwell on it too much. You don't need to define it exhaustively. You have enough to work on the next sprint, and that's the amount of requirements that you need to be defined, the work that you need to do on the next sprint. Don't worry on designing the full car from the start. You know bottom line how you want it. Okay, start working on what you know, what you need to do first, and then adjust with time, I would say. So
one final question on that, and when for management teams, when should they stop testing a certain iteration? What are some of the feedback loops or statistical significance that you see make sense to not overspend, to get to too much statistical? That's not even a term, but you know what I'm trying to get at is like, I don't want to overspend, but I also don't want to spend too little, and I want to have enough data to make the right decisions. Like, when should we actually cut and test something else?
Well, I'll give you the eternal response of it depends. No, it depends. No, but one thing, it's basically common sense of who the product owner is. If it finds the product to be at a decent enough level to launch to market. But it's very important. Sometimes people forget this small thing, the definition of done. What for you is success? What for you is a successful product? If you define it from the beginning, you'll know it when you see it. And sometimes teams forget that, And then there's of course, a whole bunch of common sense. Because if the product owner, the responsible person for that product in specific, if he tested the product and the product is about to go to market, and he understands that the competition has just launched something like that, launched it at a price point sometimes even lower than the one you were planning on launching your product to the market, then common sense makes him think that probably we should iterate one more time or give it some other distinguishable feature to launch it to market, or else the competition will crush us. That's the factor of that equation that depends on the experience of the product owner. The other is a proper definition of done. What for you is a final project? It needs to be, let's imagine you're designing a soccer ball or an American football. And for your definition of done, if it has the right shape, the right color, if it feels good, the traction is good, then it's ready. That needs to be set from the start, not when you receive it. When you see the product and you see, okay, that fits all the check boxes that I've defined in the beginning, it's ready to go to market.
That's true. And again, that's when we talk about sprints as the beginning of the sprint. Like, what is this actually? What's the outcome that we expect from it? And the intersection between product research and product knowledge, market research, market knowledge, which means that whoever's managing the sprint or who is managing this department needs to have their fingers on all those pulses. And that's where it becomes very important to management and the person taking charge and ownership of this.
Very well put. It's the definition of success. It works in everything, not just in product development. For you, what is success? So you'll only be successful not when someone tells you you're successful, is when you meet your standards, and you set your standards in the beginning. It's like, for me, being successful is being popular. For me, being successful is being rich. For me, being successful is traveling in executive class every time for work. You need to set your standards, and that will be your definition of success. When you achieve it, I'm there.
You don't want to click complete.
Exactly. I'm done.
No, I love that. So Eloi, for our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to go to thank you for this episode and reach out to you?
Well, please find me on LinkedIn. I'll be very happy to respond to all of you. I also launched a podcast called Startup with Eloi, where I talk about startups, about innovation, entrepreneurship, good stories. And I host a program here in Portugal about innovation and digital, but it's in Portuguese. But I would say find me on LinkedIn. Reach out. I'll be happy to help and discuss these topics with you, with anyone.
And I'll have those links in the show notes as well. Eloi, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you very much, Raul. It was a pleasure. Have a brilliant day.
Thank you.